Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, and it's been quite a while since I've done the last video, or well, a video, um, mainly because I've stopped buying Target books. My interest in them is pretty much gone now. They're still great and I'm still reading them, but in terms of buying them, pretty much done. So I think videos from this point, because it was a sort of Target book phase, from this point forward, I'm pretty much just going to be doing what I'm in the mood to do. And today I thought I'd review an animation of which I loved for a very long time. I went for a period of hating it, and now watching it again, my appreciation for it has gone back. Well, has came back. So we're going to review The Macra Terror. Obviously, this is a steelbook. I do not have the DVD or Blu-ray with me at the moment, so we'll use the best cover art to represent it and the best version of it, even though I still don't understand why they bored of the fucking gridlock disc, but whatever. So there's the back, and I'm not going to read the blurb because we're going to over the plot, and that is pretty much it. So I'm going to break this up into certain sections. So we'll talk about the story, then we'll talk about the animation, and I'll talk about the surviving clips, which might seem a bit but they're very brief, and I kind of want to go over them to make a comparison to the animation. So the story is basically the Doctor, Jamie, Ben, and Polly arrive on a planet far in the future with a colony on it, and basically it's a society where everything is very 1984. That dystopian book, obviously written by George Wells, I think he's called. Might have got that wrong, but basically that's what this story is. It is 1984, and basically it's a society where everyone's brainwashed into believing certain things. Like, you've not to question why you're doing this thing; you've just to do it. And yeah, at first, obviously, it's like all happy, and they take them lot in, and like, groom them and clean them, and like there's dances and all this shit. And at the start, obviously, you've got Medoc, who is basically running. Well, he's escaped, and he's running, and the Ola and the guards go after him, and that also takes place in the cliffs. That's where they meet the TARDIS crew, and then they see Medoc. Obviously, the three companions pretty much think, well, he's a nutter. The Doctor obviously thinks more than that. He just doesn't assume he's a straight up nutter, because what he's saying he could be right about. So they obviously then they go in and they get cleaned up and all this. And Medoc basically is escorted to a new prison, but he escapes thanks to Troughton. And after that, pretty much they're just shown around so they can get a better understanding of the colony. And when they're being escorted to the main sort of room, the Medoc has escaped and he's like hiding. So while the companions are having a look around, the second Doctor goes and meets up with Medoc, and this is probably my favourite moment of Troughton in the animation. We're gonna supposed to touch upon the animation now. I really like how smooth and expressionate his face is, because the problem with a lot of these animations, particularly Troughton, they just cannot get his facial expressions and his body language across. It's because Troughton's a very expressionate actor, and due to the budget restraints they have with these things, I can see why it doesn't happen with Troughton. But they clearly did go all out with this one, because I know this was very expensive to do this animation. That they just made Troughton so expressionate. It's the way his face moves and his eyebrows kind of twitch. He's like, sort of doing this and that, and like, have you seen them clearly? Like, he wide, like, his eyes open. He's like, well, I'm interested. He does that sort of shrugness that Troughton done, and has his hands, not his hands, he has his arms crossed, which I don't think Troughton might have done in that scene, but whatever. And Medoc obviously explains to him that there are these creatures called the Macra, which are obviously, I guess you could say, are better known from New Who, even though they're shit in Gridlock. tells him about the Macra, and then the Doctor's like, "Oh, what have you seen them clearly? Like, describe them to me." And then after that, basically they're escorted to their night rooms, and they're basically ordered to stay at night by Control. And obviously, Troughton being Troughton, he doesn't obey. He goes out in the night. He finds Medoc, and obviously Medoc's still hiding. And they're about to get away from the situation when all of a sudden, Big Macra comes out. Well, I say Big Macra in the animation as we see the Macra. And then after that, Medoc is basically taken to the correction hospital. Troughton's talking to the pilot. He's like, "Why do you want everyone to be the same? Like, what is this society about?" And the pilot says to him that our ancestors were very strict about this sort of thing, and blah 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 blah. And then Troughton, well, I say Troughton, we cut to see. I can do this pretty much quickly because I will say Macra Terror, it does drag, but it's good drag, where it's still watchable. So there's this really good scene where Ben, Polly, and Jamie are all asleep, and they're being gassed. Well, they're basically being given thought patterns and sleeping gas, which obviously, is to make them obey and function the way the colony wants them to. And what happens is basically Troughton comes in, wakes them up. Well, I say wakes them up. Ben and Jamie are in their own room. Polly's in a separate one. Troughton comes into Polly's room. And Ben basically becomes brainwashed, processed. Troughton smashes up equipment. He gets taken away. And basically it's decided that Medoc, he will never be corrected. So then Polly decides that she's going to go and find the others, goes after them, and basically she gets attacked by the Macra. Where Ben gets to the point where he's like, "Oh shit, Macra, like these big creatures," and he attacks the thing. And then they're taken back to the pilot's office, where it's found out that the Macra are basically in control, which is quite a cool, very well done twist. And Ben is still brainwashed. Part 3, this is really drags part 3. It's just basically Polly and Jamie are sent to the danger gang, so is Medoc. It's basically Jamie wandering around in a mine for 15 minutes with Macra coming after him, and in the meantime the Doctor's trying to work out the formula and what this gas is all about, why is it so precious, and etc, etc. That's part 3. Part 4, the Jamie, and the cliffhanger ends with Jamie about to be attacked by the Macra. The gas flow is changed, and the Macra don't attack Jamie. Jamie escapes, does the Highland flying at the door, gets caught by Ola and the guards because Ben gave him away. And basically, Polly and the second Doctor end up in this pipe room, and they go along and basically find the room with the Macra. So you have this big Macra, which is sort of grey. He's basically the leader. And you've got on a Macra, well, not how it was in the TV story, but it's kind of my thought process. That's what I'm thinking of. But that was not originally what it was. It was just it was the same Macra prop, just painted grey. And they basically find out that they're destroying, basically gassing the colony to live themselves, which is a really cool idea, to be honest. And they go back, they tell the pilot, "We've discovered something, you need to come here." The controller orders, "Nope, the pilot must go this and there," and basically the pilot disobeys control. They go along, he discovers the Macra, they head back to that room, and basically they're about to be gassed. I forgot to mention Medoc dies in part 3, gets beaten by a Macra. Well, I say it again, that's what happens in the animation. In the story, he gets bitten. So they'll get sent into this room to be gassed, but Ben is still out. So basically, when everyone's left the room, he equalizes the gap. Well, puts the outflow and inflow on, and pushes a lever. Basically, somehow suffocates the Macra. Boom, they're all gone, and the colony's basically saved. So that's the plot. I didn't need to go that in depth, but that's your plot of Macra Terror. My thoughts on the story. I think Macra Terror is actually pretty good. Now, when I watched it as a recon, I I just didn't think much of it, to be honest. I just thought, yeah. When this animation came out, I was like, holy shit, this is actually a really good story. What I like about it is the majority of the folk in that colony are young people, people about my age, 18 to 23 years old ish. And the reason why it's effective is because obviously people our age who are young, we don't understand how the world quite works around us. Like, we don't understand everything yet. And basically, because of that, we can be easily manipulated and brainwashed into thinking, oh, that is the right thing, when it's not. And that's what I like. It just takes advantage of like young people and shows like how easily manipulated and brainwashed we can be whilst these fucking giant crabs are controlling us. It is stupid, but it's the 60s. You need to set it in context. And it is a kind of a draggy one, but I think the animation makes it interesting to watch. But I think Macra Terror is a pretty good story. I don't really have much more else to say about it, to be honest. It's just kind of it's a fun romp. You've got the Highland flying, probably being attacked by the Macra is pretty cool. The characters in it, the pilot, I like him. Ola, he feels like the second villain that doesn't need to be there, but he's still a good actor. What's he called? Jerton Clubber, that's what it's called. Them lot are good in it. Trouton's great as always. Paul, this is another thing. Like Polly, Ben, and Jamie actually all feel useful for once. Ben is brainwashed, so he's not on their side. Polly is with the Doctor through the second half of it, pretty much. She's always with him, and she's like helping him like work out the gas flow and all this and that. And Jamie, he is sent to the mines and being just by Macra. At this point, Fraser Hines, obviously, if people don't know this story, he was obviously only meant to be in the Highlanders, but a producer, I think at the time, told him to stay on. He agreed to it. So they had already written the scripts ahead, which were, what was it, Underwater Menace, Moonbase, and Macra Terror. So they had to rewrite the scripts, and you can tell how much he's not quite TARDIS savvy yet in this. So yeah, so them lot are good, and Medoc is a great supporting character. Really well done, really well acted. What's Terence Lodge? That's his name. Fantastic actor. So, we'll talk about the surviving clips, because well, there's very little that we can actually see from this story. So we obviously have probably the most famous one, which is Annika getting attacked by the little stubby macro prop. Now, I am glad we have that scene, because we don't have much of the macra. There's like a couple of telesnaps and that one publicity shot of it. Apart from that, that's it. It's the only clip we have where we see it in action, and only one was ever made, and it's not the best. Basically, Annika flung herself to the macro prop, and basically it was, scrubbing her foot, and then like obviously Ben's trying to get her out. So yeah, and then there's the clip where she's like, it's another one, and there's also a clip of a claw coming out from the side. After that, it's pretty much 8mm off-screen stuff. There's not a huge amount. Most of it's just Trouton's face, where he just says a couple lines. And there's one of Jamie was like, hello, who's there? And then there's one of Polly, which is like, don't leave me down here. So I suppose it is nice from this story. We have little surviving bits of footage of the four main actors. And we have probably my favourite one is that scene where they've just came into the gas flow room, and obviously they're playing that music, and the Doctor's like, oh, dreadful, did you hear that rhyme? The man who wrote that ought to be sent to the danger gang, not us, which is a very funny moment. That scene exists, which is very nice. Now, the animation. So with this, they took creative liberty with it. They ignored, they were going to ignore the telesnaps. Amory Walsh, the fucking bitch, basically was going to scrap them all together, but Rob Ritchie didn't listen to her, and he took inspiration from the telesnaps, which is the absolute right decision to do. The animation is really good, to be honest. Post Power, this is the best animation, definitely. The characters feel fluent, and what I mean by this is like, right, they're 2D. Basically, the team behind this, Sun and Moon Productions, they've done something quite revolutionary, I think. So they animated in Toon Boom Harmony, which is a very expensive process. It allows for 2D drawings to be fluently animated, like rather than a choppy head turn that you tend to see in these animations. It's a proper, because you see like the, well, not wrinkles, but you see like the parts of their nose change and their mouth and like their side profile. You see it all come together, which is really nice. In my opinion, this is the best character models have ever looked in any animation. They're so fluent, they're so smooth. The way they walk, the way the shoulders sort of do that, the way the arms come out, they're still a bit choppy at times, but they do look quite good. And the Macra, they're 3D models, I know, but they look astonishing, the Macra, which it really helps emphasize the story, the changes they've done. Now, am I happy with the changes they've done? No. I would have preferred if they just straight up went off the TV story, but this is the thing. Obviously, they're animating these in colour now. I tend to not watch them in colour. I prefer watching them in black and white, but it kind of is made to be watched in colour. I don't like saying this, but because it's in widescreen and that, watching this in black and white feels wrong, which might be very controversial, but because of the creative liberties they're taking, it's. I mean, I watched this in black and white the other week, and the reason why I'm doing a review is because I watched it in colour with my friend Reese recently. And here's a better example: Fear from the Deep. I can only watch that in colour because of the amount of changes they made to that, which was just too much in my opinion. I cannot watch that in black and white. I need to watch it in colour, which I don't like because it's a story that is built so much on its atmosphere, and from the brief surviving footage, it's in black and white. It relies on that black and white. So if you watch it in colour and treat it as its own, then it can be a pretty good experience, which is kind of what you need to do with this. They didn't completely ignore the original. They did match telesnaps. They sync up the audio well for most of the time. The character faces. Now, the problem is with these animations as well, it seems like you can't have. Sorry, what was that? The face detail on the characters in this. Now, it seems like we can't have one without the other. So basically, what I mean by this is, nowadays, for example, Power of the Daleks, the faces are really well detailed and shaded, but you can't have a smooth head turn with them. It's a very choppy side profile, face forward, side profile. Sorry. However, with Macra Terror, because they softened the face detail, it means it allows for a much more fluid, like, face movement. Now, I think it depends on if it looks like the characters. Now, Troughton, it does look like him-ish, but I think the biggest problem with it is Troughton had these very sort of unique, I don't know, jaw lines. I don't know. Basically, these lines here, cheekbones. He had very obvious cheekbones, Troughton, where in the animation they're not there, and I think that's the part that's really missing to give his face that sort of very expressionate look. Polly does not look like Polly. Ben and Jamie, they're all right, but they look like very amateur drawings of them. Ola looks fine. Medoc was not bad, and the pilot's actually quite good as well, ish. The best likeness in the whole, in the controller, is actually really good detail on his face. I'd say the best likeness in this entire animation is the face on the screen, the fake controller. But that's because they didn't have to animate his face whatsoever, so they could put detail and all that in it. So yeah, which kind of makes him stand out more in a way, even though you don't see him that often. And that's basically it. The sets, they've made them slightly bigger, not too much, just a little bit. And what as well? Another thing they've changed is the cliffs. Now, originally there was stuff outside of Dock round about, and then the top of the cliffs that was done in studio. And that's just all one sort of big landscape render, I guess you could say, because when the TARDIS is on top of the cliffs and they're all interacting with each other, that was originally done in studio. But in the animation, it's outside, you can see the sky and that. My problem with that is it still sounds like they're in a studio. It doesn't sound echoey and sort of the voice would be more out there. It sounds kind of compressed, which doesn't work well with what they're drawing. Another good example of this is Polly being attacked by the Macra. Now originally obviously it was just a stubby one grabbing her by the foot. In this, the huge Macra picks her up and then does sort of that with her. The problem with that is you can still hear Ben hitting the fucking leg on the Macra. And then when he actually does end up hitting the leg, because he doesn't sort of look like he's still brainwashed, but it's like, oh shit, no, I need to save my friend. They've added sound effects of him whacking the leg. The problem with that as well, it's such a huge, vast space. The voice should be more out there and more echoey, but it still sounds like it's in a studio, because that's what the audio was, obviously. And there's one more example of this, but I can't think of it at the top of my head. We'll go on to the scene they cut. The rough and tumble scene. Cutting this, I find bullshit. Because, right, they said it's not relevant. Well, in terms of costume changes, it is. With this, they've done that pre-credit scene of reanimating the end of the moon base, which is nice. The TARDIS shot flying for space is really nice, but the problem I have with it is we didn't need it. They spent time animating Troughton's face in the titles, and they also, with the Macra, they spent a lot of money on them. See, they put so much money into having stuff that they put so much money for stuff that wasn't even in the original. But then they can't animate a 2.5 minute, because that was 2.5 minutes they cut. If you can animate stuff that wasn't even the original, you can do that scene. It wouldn't have been too hard. So it's a shame, because it is actually really a nice, funny moment. It also shows the second Doctor not wanting to be the same as everyone, because he goes in, obviously, that machine and that scruffles his hair and clothes and that, showing him he doesn't want to be the same as everyone else. So it's quite an important scene. And the Macra, they do look really good in this, but I think, to be honest, they should have just animated the original ones with legs. I think that's how it should have been done, because the problem I have again as well, when you hear the audio, and if it's Jamie, if the Macra's coming after Jamie, the problem with it is, surely those Macra that we see in this animation, they would be more aggressive than that, not just sort of they would be more violent and scuttling towards, but because they're doing that, they're relying off the original audio, it's just kind of playing the music. You hear some growls in that, and it's the biggest problem with this animation. It looks so good, but it sounds so out of place. That is what's wrong with this animation. And I think they should have just done it as a straight up recreation. But then I love the changes they've made. It's an animation I have a very weird relationship with. I love the changes they made in it, but if I want to get the full sort of experience, then that's what I mean about it's kind of made to be watched in colour. Watch it in black and white, it's just sort of oh, that's how original would have looked. Well, that's how original went out. So yeah, that's kind of all I have to say, to be honest. Overall, it's a fucking gorgeous animation. It won an award last year, which rightfully so, but it just sounds out of place. And then people make these statements that maybe it's the audio that's the problem. It's not the audio that's the problem, it's the animation that's the problem. The audio's very important. It's there as a guide for them to know when the characters are talking and who's talking with and that and all this. The animation, they clearly want to be more ambitious with these projects rather than just like doing a straight away. They clearly want to go all out with it, which I appreciate them doing. But if you're doing it for the original audio, then it's not going to really work. It sits in the uncanny valley. Again, it looks so good, but it sounds so out of place. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on the Macra Terror animation. Overall, very good. I'd highly recommend it. But if you need to set it in mind, like, and you need to treat it as, okay, this is Macra Terror for 2019. That's how you need to watch it. If you're watching it as a recreation, you might not like it. But I love it. I think it's a great animation, but it just sounds out of place. I find it's a kind of like a powered out situation. The audio just doesn't quite match up with it at times. So yeah, that's all I've really got to say. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all soon. Goodbye.